Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into a really shocking breakdown in Canada's tax system. We're talking about a crisis that's allowed criminals to snatch the identities of thousands of people and make hundreds of millions of your tax dollars just disappear.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the fraud, we have to start with the human cost. Because for people like David Miller, this isn't some abstract news story. No, it's a devastating reality that's threatening to take away everything he and his wife have ever worked for.
And the scale of this problem? It is absolutely staggering. We are not talking about a few isolated incidents here. A high-ranking insider from the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, estimates the total theft could be as much as $500 million. A number that big? Well, that just screams that something is fundamentally and catastrophically broken.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll meet the victims and see the real-world impact. Then we're going to expose the fatal flaw in the system that criminals are walking right through. After that, we'll actually follow the money, we'll look at the powerful industry fighting to keep things just as they are, and finally, we'll hear from insiders who are blowing the whistle.
You know, it's so easy to hear a number like $500 million and just have your eyes glaze over. But we can't. Behind every single fraudulent claim, there's a real person with a real story whose life has been turned completely upside down.
Just take a look at these two cases from opposite ends of the country. Over in New Brunswick, David Miller found out a scammer had changed his address, filed a fake $11,000 return, and now the CRA is demanding he pay it back, pushing him to the brink of losing his home. Then, all the way over in BC, Aisha Asaji had her account frozen for 9 long months. She was locked out of her own benefits, forced to try and survive on just $400 a month. These aren't just statistics, these are lives in crisis.
And make no mistake. If you're thinking these are just a few unlucky, isolated cases, you'd be wrong. Dead wrong. Leaked documents show there have been over 31,000 security breaches at the CRA since 2020 alone. That's the private data of 62,000 taxpayers exposed. This isn't a small crack in the system. The floodgates are wide open.
So, the big question, right? How on earth is this even possible? How are so many people getting away with this? Well, the answer lies in a fundamental, and I mean fatal, weakness in the way most of us actually file our taxes in Canada.
You see, the vast majority of Canadians don't file their taxes directly with the government. Nope. Instead, we use what are called third-party tax filers. It's a massive industry worth almost $2 billion a year. And these private companies, they get special codes that give them a key, basically, direct access to your personal CRA account. The whole thing is built on a foundation of trust.
In the playbook the fraudsters use to exploit this trust is devastatingly simple. First, they get their hands on stolen personal data. Second, they use a stolen tax filer code to waltz right into a victim's account. Third, they cook up a completely fake return designed to trigger a huge refund. And finally, they just redirect that money, your money, to an account that they control. It's simple, it's repeatable, and it is highly effective.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Listen to someone who saw this whole mess from the inside. Shauna Roy. She's a former fraud investigator for the CRA, and she calls this relationship between taxpayers and private filers very dangerous, pointing to just rampant abuse and identity theft.
Okay, so we know what's happening and how it's happening, but now let's talk about who. By literally following the money from just one case, we can trace a path right to the people who are out there spending your tax dollars.
So our case study starts with a man in Kelowna. He gets locked out of his CRA account, and when he finally gets in, he discovers someone has used H&R Block to file a fake return in his name, siphoning off a $30,000 refund. So, where did all that money go?
Well, bank records for a prepaid credit card funded by that stolen refund lay out a very clear timeline. Get this, 30 minutes after the first chunk of money hits the account, bam, $2,500 is withdrawn in cash. Then the spending spree begins. A phone store, restaurants, a gift shop out in Banff, including a pretty nice $263 dinner at Earl's. All of it paid for with stolen public money.
But it was that last transaction on the list, a $525 charge at a restaurant in Edmonton, that turned out to be the crucial clue. When investigators went to the restaurant, the owner told them that on that exact night, her credit card machine had been stolen.
And what comes with a stolen machine? Usually CCTV footage. The video identified 2 people, Doug Poplet, a career criminal with more than 70 convictions for, you guessed it, fraud and impersonation, and his wife, Christina Chirac. The prepaid card from the tax scam? It was the exact same one they used to test the stolen machine. Busted.
Now, catching criminals like Doug Poplet feels like a win, for sure, but it's really just treating a symptom, not the disease. He and people like him are only able to pull this off because of these deep systemic flaws. So the bigger question is, why is the system that enables them so resistant to change? Well, as it so often does, the answer comes down to money and influence.
You have to understand, the tax preparation industry is a juggernaut. It's a $122 billion business in the US, and it pulls in nearly $2 billion a year right here in Canada. And the big players, American companies like Intuit, the makers of TurboTax, and H&R Block, they have a very powerful financial incentive to keep you from filing your taxes directly with the government for free.
And what's so wild is that experts like Jennifer Robertson from Carleton University point out that this isn't some impossible problem to solve. Plenty of other developed countries like the UK and France, they offer free direct government filing. So what's the issue here in Canada? She says what's missing is a political champion, someone in power who's willing to actually take on this powerful industry lobby.
And if you want the smoking gun of that influence, here it is. In 2018, the CRA was actually developing its own free public filing software. But then, a new industry lobby group with American founders suddenly appeared in Ottawa. And very shortly after that, the government project was just canceled.
So you've got all this powerful lobbying from the outside. What's going on the inside? Well, let's hear from some whistleblowers from within the CRA who are now finally breaking what they call the cone of silence.
These confidential sources paint a deeply troubling picture. One person called the minister's claims about a robust system delusional, said she's out to lunch. Another described the situation as the Wild West. But the main theme? A culture that cares more about protecting the CRA's reputation than protecting Canadian taxpayers. One insider even said that when the scandal first broke, yeah, there was panic, but there were also a lot of people inside who quietly said, finally.
So when you break it all down, where does the responsibility for this mess really lie? The scammers are the direct perpetrators, sure. The private tax filing industry creates the vulnerability, but the evidence suggests the largest share of the failure, half of it, rests squarely with the government and the CRA for building and then failing to secure a system that is just so easily exploited.
And after all the systemic analysis, all the flowcharts and investigations, we come full circle. We're right back with David Miller. Months after his identity was stolen, he's still waiting for his actual tax refund, his credit rating is in tatters, and he is still fighting to save his home. Left to pick up the pieces of a life that was shattered by this failure.
And that leaves us with one last critical question. The evidence points to a massive failure of security, of oversight, and of political will. And it forces all of us to ask, when a foundational public service like the tax system breaks down this badly, who is truly held accountable for all the damage that's been done?